Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 58. This episode is dedicated in loving memory to Rashi Minkowicz, whose yahrzeit is today, the first yahrzeit. And you may recall a year ago, I dedicated an entire episode with the month of Adar, month of joy, to tragedy, sadness, which seems to contradict the whole concept of simcha. Being that this is the month of Adar, I will definitely address this topic again. But I want to begin first with a few announcements. Number one, the judges have been going through the contest. They're almost halfway through. Over 500 essays, as I mentioned, were submitted, which is a credit to all of you. And very exciting to review the different innovative and interesting takes that different people had on different issues and different maimorim and ideas in Chassidus. So stay tuned as we continue the judging process and the announcements that will come with the winners. And as I said last week, from my perspective, everybody is a winner. The mere fact that we sit down and apply ourselves to understand and appreciate Chassidus in context of our human lives and human condition is itself the biggest netzach, the biggest victory and biggest winning. Regarding the fact that this is the week of Purim, the end of this week on Thursday, so consider this a special joy edition on joy, simcha, and Jewish pride. And of course, in the context of Chassidus Applied, which is addressing some of the difficult questions, as I just mentioned, maybe the most difficult of all, how do you deal with sadness in a month of simcha? Sadness and joy seem to be contradictions, especially a tragedy, especially in Alei Aleinu, no one should ever know of anything negative, but unfortunately in the world in which we live still, until Mashiach's coming, there's still sadness in this world. And as such, how do you deal with it in a month when we're told, Mishanichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha? So we'll be dealing with that question. As we also discussed last week, Amalek is of course Haman, is Hagogi, stems from Amalek, and Amalek is the archetype of the alter ego to everything that is Jewish, which is including Amalek as suffix doubt, Amalek as kridus, kaltkeit, apathy, indifference, Amalek as chutzpah. So I will also do a follow-up to some of the topics we discussed about chutzpah. And all, obviously, is all connected to the themes of this period in time, which is Purim and Adar and so on. So let's begin with just a thought on Purim, and then we'll take it into the questions that many of you continue to ask. And I encourage you to continue to send them, and that is to meaningfullife.com/mylife. These questions that you submit are all anonymous and confidential. If you want to write to me and allow me to answer you, I can't do that through that forum because it's a one-way street. It's through sending an email to Simon, my name's Simon at meaningfullife.com, and I'll try to respond either directly or through these episodes. So, Purim. So Purim is interesting. It says the mitzvah is chayiv inish l'psuma b'Purim ad lo yada. That a person is responsible to get intoxicated to the point of ad lo yada, where you can't distinguish between Mordechai and Adar Haman, between the blessing of Mordechai be blessed and Haman be cursed, which itself is an odd statement. But how does one interpret it, and what context does it have within Purim? Why Purim? Why can't you say Pesach is also a great joy? Any holiday we could associate. Why is the chayiv inish l'psuma dafka in Purim, specifically on Purim? So frankly, without Chassidus, one can't really appreciate that, because, as I said, you can say that any type of joy, you should have joy. But Chassidus explains that Purim reaches a level of Geirel, and that also explains why Purim is named by such a strange name, Hapur Hu HaGeirel. It's a lottery. It's the lots that him and Haman threw lots, and it designated what day he wanted to destroy the Jews. Why would you call a holiday by that name? And a name should capture the essential theme. So according to Chassidus, it does, because Geirel is a state that is beyond the rational. When you throw a Geirel, when you have a lottery, it's not something you can calculate. So it associates with the Geirel of Yom Kippur, where also a Geirel was thrown to determine which seh was used for the korban and which was thrown la'azazel. Geirel represents l'mayla metam v'das. So both in the aved of a person, it represents that beyond being rational, you have to go to the super rational. And Purim symbolizes the Mesiras Nefesh that the Jews had in a time which was so difficult, and that Mesiras Nefesh goes beyond the rational logic that a person has, and hence the word Gedel, and hence Chayav Inish L'Psuma Adalayada is beyond the rational. The point is obviously not that Mordechai and Haman can be equalized. We have to always know the distinction, but you reach a place which is beyond their definition and seer. In that place itself, God chose Mordechai over Haman. But it's not because it's defined by their structure, as Chassidus explains, that bchira, true bchira, when you choose, even if you choose one, but it's chosen because you're not nitfus in it. It means it's not chosen because you're compelled to choose. You choose out of your complete free volition. So Purim represents that connection that the Jews chose God and God chose the Jews at their own volition, as the Talmud says. The Gemara says that by Matan Torah, the Jews could still have an argument and say, you know what, by Matan Torah, Kof Aleim Har Kekigis, you lifted the mountain on top of us, and essentially you gave us an ultimatum, either receive the Torah or don't. You can say it was imposed upon us. So Kimu v'Kibla Yehudim, which, as we read in the Megillah, that Matan Torah, by Purim, they accepted it at their own volition, at their own choice, with absolutely not being compelled at all. Because there was nothing begoli, nothing revealed during Purim. As we know, it's a nest that is melubish beteva, it's enclosed in the garments, natural garments, and yet the Jews chose, through their efforts, they chose to receive Torah. And that was the consummation of Matan Torah. What does this all mean in our personal lives? It means that there's one day in the year, even higher in some ways than Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is Kippurim, Yom Kippurim, as the Tikkun Ezer says, and the Alter Rebbe brings it in Torah. Chassidus cites it, because Purim can accomplish what Yom Kippur does through abstaining from fruit and from the 5 different involvement, the Hey Nuyim, by abstaining from eating and drinking and washing ourselves and so on. On Purim, it's through Suda, Mishta v'Suda, through involvement in a Yom Malach, it's a day of work. Even if you don't go to work, but you're allowed to do work, in a regular day, so to speak, where things seem to be regular and ordinary, you discover the extraordinary that is beyond the rational. So to separate ourselves on a day, Yom Kippur, then we're similar to Malachim, that relatively is easier, because you're separating yourself from the material involvement. To be in a material world and there recognize a divine element that is beyond the rational is a far greater thing. So in the context of psychological language, in Chassidus Applied, applying this to our lives, it means for a person to be complete, it's not enough to just be a rational, holy person. It's calculated, it's measured according to your needs or according to your standards. That there's a time, once a year, where you go out of all those limitations to the point where there's no distinction at all between anything. And there, you experience Kedusha. So it's in the ordinary day, seemingly ordinary day, where you don't see the name of God revealed in the Megillah at all. And yet when you connect the dots, you see the choreography, the divine choreography that makes sense. And this is true in all our lives. You look at your life, it can seem random. It can seem, why did this happen to me? Why did that happen? But when you look from a distance or in retrospect, you connect the dots, you see the hand of God. And that is a super-rational hand, but it appears in a very ordinary way. And ultimately, it's about seeing the extraordinary within the ordinary. Now, of course, Purim is this unbridled joy and simcha, because in the darkest moments, where it was literally at the point of genocide, where Haman's decree could have literally destroyed the entire Jewish people, a real Holocaust, and yet, through their efforts, through the Mesiras Nefesh, it was converted, transformed. Chedesh Asher Nepach Lahem. The entire month was transformed from a month of tragedy and it could have potential tragedy to a month of great joy. And therefore the joy is even deeper, because it's not just regular joy, it's a joy that comes from the darkness. The Yisun Er Min HaCheshach, the energy that comes out of the darkness, is always far greater, qualitatively and quantitatively for sure. So Purim is also the simcha of his hapcha, which leads us to the big question, which many people have asked, both in Chassidus Applied and many of us ask in general. What do you do with the sadness of life? Whether it's a tragedy, a personal tragedy, a communal one, what happens? Suddenly comes the month of Adar, you're supposed to put brakes on any type of sadness. Life is filled with sadness, which really is a broader question, not just about the month of Adar, it's a question about, in general, about the all year round. You say, Ivdus Hashem b'simcha, Simcha is such a fundamental principle. How could you be joyous when there is something that you have reasons not to be happy? Can you just turn it on? We know there's the big question that the Maggid of Mezritch asks about Avos Hashem, loving God. The same can be asked about Avos Yisrael. It's one thing, you can regulate actions. You could tell somebody, even though you're not in the mood, you should still give tzedakah, charity. You're not in the mood, you keep Shabbos, you eat kosher. But how do you regulate emotions? If you don't love, you don't love. You could say, even if you don't like someone, you should still treat them nicely. Fine. But the mitzvah is v'ahavta l're'echa kamocha. Not just to treat him nicely, to love the person. And what happens if the person happens to be obnoxious, or you just happen to dislike that person? Same thing with Eibishter. V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha is a mitzvah of the lev. What happens if you just don't have that feeling? Can you command someone to feel? So the Rebbe Maggid of Mezritch Maggid answers that the mitzvah is under his bonanus. That the mitzvah is to contemplate on things. Let's say you meet somebody and you don't find anything that you can be attracted to, or you find appealing. You think about his soul. You know the soul was given to him by God, and you recognize that there's a divine force inside of him. That's your work, to contemplate. Same thing, contemplate on God's creation, God's blessings to you, your health, your children, the beautiful things in your life. So contemplation will bring the love. But Chassidus has the question, then the mitzvah should have been to contemplate, lizbeinen, leida, lachshev, whatever the word would be. Why? But the mitzvah is va'afta. So Chassidus answers, because his bonus inevitably will bring a feeling. It's not two steps. The way to arouse, awaken a feeling, stimulate a feeling inside of a human being is through concentrating on it. If a person is distracted, for example, see, even when they're distracted, then their child walks in from school, and the child seems to be in need of some nurturing and some love and some validation, and you're busy with something else. So that moment, that love will not be expressed. When you suddenly concentrate and say, here's my child, and you focus on your child's needs, and you apply yourself, so automatically, as soon as you pay attention, the love will be awakened. The same is here, that the love is really there. A person, the divine neshama in each of us loves everybody in this world because God created them. If you love God, you love what God loves. However, we're distracted. We're thinking about other things. So the mitzvah is his bonus, is the way to get the catalyst, the way to ignite that natural love that's there, to get it to the surface, you need something to wake it up. So his bonus is just a method to get to the love. But the mitzvah continues to be the love. So the same thing you could say with simcha and joy. Simcha is a natural state of each of us. You never saw a child that was born sad. Unless I'm not talking about a clinical or due to illness or due to some distortion. Children are naturally happy. Why? Did they get something they wanted? Did they get something they needed? Because they help us understand the real definition of simcha, which I'll discuss a little more during this episode. See, we see simcha, we equate it with happiness. What makes you happy? If I want something and I don't have it, I'm not happy. If I get it, I'm happy. We see it as a verb, as an action. You do this, it makes you happy. But happiness is a true simcha, simchas hachayim, true simcha, is a state of being. And that state of being is the birthright of every neshama. Every neshama that senses it's connected to its source and has a purpose in life, that alone is simcha. It doesn't need something to be done. What is the thing that gives children most joy? So many people, by giving them a gift. Yes, you can get them to smile for the moment by taking them on a trip, showing them a video. These are momentary, temporary things that may reveal an immediate reaction that would be a joyous reaction. But the thing that gives a child most joy is the mere fact that you love the child. You pay attention, that you're there for them. This is far less tangible. It's not like one thing you do. It's the presence of a loving person in your life that gives you a certain level of contentment and fulfillment. The same idea that a neshama senses that it is here for a purpose and God sent it here. That's the reason that a person has natural joy. When does that joy go away? Not go away. When does it go undercover? When life takes over and you start valuing things. A few weeks ago, my granddaughter, I wanted to do a test. So I went over to her and I said to her, Luba, I want to give you a gift. So of course a gift, children get their attention. So I want to give you $100 million. And literally, without even blinking, she just walked away like I was like... There was not even value to the numbers. She doesn't even know what it means. Had I said I'm buying you a coloring book or a doll or some other toy that she could identify with, she would have been very happy. So I was thinking to myself, so what is it? Most of us would dismiss. She's a little girl. She's naive. She doesn't yet appreciate what $100 million is, let alone more than that. Or maybe children have it more right than we do. They understand what's true value. If I would say to her, I'd like to hug you, I'd like to give you something, attention, let's talk to each other, she had more joy from that than giving her the money. So at what point do children grow up, so to speak, and become jaded and become like us adults? I don't know if it's called knowledge. It's called becoming affected by this material world where you suddenly begin appreciating more the temporary than the eternal and the permanent. We can learn a lot more from our children than they can learn from us in that context. Because a soul by its nature, the happiness of a soul is knowing that it's here for a reason, that it's connected to its source, that it was sent here, and it has a vote of confidence from the highest place of all, God Himself. And when we parents validate that, that's what reinforces the simcha, the natural simcha sachayim of our children as they grow into adults. What undermines that is when you begin to define happiness by things that you have. If I acquire this, I'll be happy. If I have this amount of money, I can buy anything I want. Which seems to suggest that the wealthier one would be, the happier they would be. Why don't you check statistics on that? It's actually the exact opposite. Because things that are temporary can never give you permanent happiness. How could temporary things give you permanence? So it's a whole different mindset and perspective of what joy is. And in that context, as I said, I'll elaborate more in specific questions. In that context, sadness is not a contradiction to simcha. Why? Because life includes challenges. That doesn't take away the fact that you were sent here on a mission. It doesn't take away the fact that you are connected to your source. So when we teach our children that, yes, we teach them there'll be ups and downs in life. And some downs will be very, very difficult. Lo yaleinu, no one should ever know. But there are some challenges in life that are extremely difficult. That doesn't take away from the fact that you're still here on earth, you're still sent here, and you have a painful experience you go through. You can suffer, but don't become a sufferer. So what the Adar teaches us is that even if you have a sad thing in your life, even if there are things that you've experienced that are not so-called something to celebrate, but the mere fact that you exist, the mere fact that you feel, the mere fact that you're here, that is the Simchas HaChaim. Now, we hope that the Simchas HaChaim, happiness in life, shouldn't just be based on that essential core, but it should also be expressed in Teva, Nira, V'Anigla, which is why we ask for open joy. That we should celebrate the marriage of our children, we should celebrate Simchas together, birth of children, healthy children, and so on. Obviously, but that doesn't take away that there is a fundamental Simcha in the mere fact that one exists. I remember Simchas Teda, I believe it was Tafshin Mem Gimel, Mem Daled. And the Rebbe spoke about 7 levels of how one has Simcha. And the first one was the mere fact that God put you on this earth. You think about that. That's the basis of everything. Because if you weren't here, you wouldn't be feeling anything, not pain and not joy. The fact that we exist, but we take it for granted. That's why we are more troubled when things don't work. But we don't ever ask the question when things do work. We don't say, why is it working? Because we assume that's a given. Now, fine, let's all feel that we deserve that. But don't underestimate that itself is the reason that we're here, is itself the biggest simcha of all. So in that context, you also can understand what the Gemara says. Strange Gemara. It says, Kishem she mishanichnas of mamaytim besimcha kach mishanichnas odem marbem besimcha. Just like when the month of Av, the saddest month of the calendar, we diminish in joy, so too, in the month of Adar, we increase in joy. Why equate the two? Let people be happy in Adar. You have to remind them that Tisha B'Av is coming in the summer, which is so many months away. Why equate the two? And you find another equating the two. It says Moshe Rabbeinu was Mesakin just as he was Mesakin 7 days of Avelis, which is the Shiva, to sit Shiva for the loss of a loved one. So too he was Mesakin, he decreed 7 days of Simcha, which is the Sheva Brachos. Why equate the two? Because Simcha in Judaism is not just about a momentary happiness. It's about a state of being. And we are happy all the time. Happy meaning that we have a certain sense of confidence, a certain sense of fulfillment that we're here on a purpose. So therefore, the fact that there is a month called Av, or there will be times in this world before Mashiach comes that there will be a death and there will be loss, that does not make us afraid. It's It's not like we are in denial that there's sadness in the world. Even while there's sadness, we know that it's all one big circle. We don't understand it today, and we would love to be able to see our loved ones, and we'd be able to connect. We'd love everything to be, as I said, b'tei v'nira v'nigla, and we deserve that. But even there's a momentary lapse, and it doesn't seem that it seems there's a concealment, a helam v'hester, whether it's a golus in the general sense of the word, we never lose the connection, and that's why we're still here as Jews. Even in the depths of the darkest moments of the abyss of the Holocaust, the gas chambers themselves, the crematoriums, the Jews always maintained the connection because they said, you can take our bodies, but you can't take our souls. You can take our lives, but you can't take our faith. You can take us, but you can't take our children and our grandchildren. V'hisha amdalanu. No matter what happened, there's something that is perseveres, no matter what, and transcends all these challenges. Again, let me make it clear, this doesn't mean we understand the challenges, it doesn't mean we like them, it doesn't mean we even accept them. But it means that we do not allow ourselves to be destroyed in the process. We forge ahead, and that is a big simcha in that itself. Now, I shall soon discuss a little more from Tanya. There's a whole body of chapters in Tanya. If you can say a theme that is covered from chapters Chav Vav all the way through Lamed Daled, which is 6, Chav Vav, Chav Zayin, Chav Ches, Chav Tes, Lamed, Lamed Aleph, Lamed Beis, Lamed Gimel, 9 chapters. The Alter Rebbe discusses Simcha and Atzvus, which is, of course, the theme of this month, but it's a theme in general of an attitude toward life. The Alter Rebbe felt 9 chapters are necessary to discuss such a theme. You can imagine that even for the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim, and definitely for us, Tanya is written as eitzes for all of us. It's a fundamental principle. Now, I'll give a summary of that a little later. I just wanted to give an overview of Purim as it's applied to our life. So the Purim Simcha is actually one of the most powerful forces we can apply to our challenges in life. Purim is not just a day, the technical, mechanical parts of Purim is just listening to the Megillah, having a Sudas Purim, Shleach Mones, Matanas Lavyenim, influencing others, Miftzah Purim. But the ultimate underlying theme of Purim is a recognition and a revisiting of our fundamental connection with the etzem of Atzmus and the etzem of a neshama, the Yechida, like Yom Kippur Yechida. And Yechida transcends, Adar Yada transcends the structure of Haman and Mordechai even, because even a Haman is not a helam on the connection that a Jew has with the etzem and the source. And that's the deepest root of Simcha. When you have that type of connection, nothing can destroy you. And as such, that alone is a joy that is beyond bounds. So with that said, let's go through a few other topics. The theme of, I want to go back to the theme of chutzpah, which I discussed, and a few more points I wanted to make that we didn't have time in the last episode. Chutzpah, of course, Amalek represents chutzpah, but we also know this chutzpah of Kedusha. And the point was well taken that Chassidim, because they have a certain type of healthy audacity, that's what allows them to also overcome challenges, because if you're going to be meek and humble in the wrong type of situation, you won't be able to deal with the challenges of life. The Frierdiker Rebbe once told someone, Rabbi Avram Hecht told me the story, that Frierdiker Rebbe encouraged him to go give drushes, to speak in shuls, which was a thing Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe for sure encouraged, even young people. So he was very reluctant, saying that he's not a darshan. His brother Shlomo Zalman Hecht, his brother Yankel Hecht, they're the darshanim. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said to him, B'zeh Lashon, he said to him, Anova, Shalebim Kema, Yiseidasa Gaiva. Misplaced humility is rooted in arrogance. So when we use the word chutzpah, and we use the word arrogance, you have to understand, sometimes arrogance takes the shape, no, I can't do it, let someone else do it. Maybe it's simply because you're ashamed, you're afraid you may fail, you're afraid your ego, this way, like that famous story where one of the Rebbes would never speak. It's not a Chabad, we're talking about one of these, it's like somewhat of an anecdote or joke, a Rebbe that would never speak. So the Gabbai said to him, Rebbe, people are starting to say that the Rebbe doesn't have anything to say, that's why he doesn't speak, not because he's so humble. So the Rebbe said to him, well, let's put it this way, as long as I stay quiet, they'll never know. If I start speaking, they know for sure that I don't have anything to say. So there's sometimes that humility can take on the shape of arrogance, and arrogance can take on the shape of humility. So the point is that in this world we need to have a ge'en yankiv. Goes back to Purim. Everyone bowed to Haman, to Haman, except Mordechai. Now think of it in modern terms. Imagine you're in a business and you're in an office, you're in a law firm or whatever type of industry, and there's a boss he's a tyrant, and he loves when people will give him honor and respect, and everyone has to give him a little nod every morning. And there's one person, one Jew in the business, in the firm says, no, I'm not going to nod to him. Even the other Jews in the firm say, what do you got to make trouble for? He wants a little kavod, give him a little kavod. So you could argue, what's the big thing? Give him a nod. Indulge him. Yet, no. And this becomes a foundation. Haman gets incited by that, and that's the straw that breaks the camel's back, and that's when he decides he's going to go through with the decree. But what was the message? Mordechai ha-Yehudi. A Yehudi is Heide b'chol ha'Torah kula, and is Kefer b'Avodah Zarah. A Jew does not bow to anyone. We only have one God. We don't bow to men, and we don't bow to man-made things. Not money, not power, and so on. Now we know it's not an easy challenge. Sometimes people bow, they bow in their own particular way. Mordechai established, and this goes back to the Lo Yoda, a type of supra-rational commitment. I don't care what logic you're going to tell me. Bottom line is we don't bow to things. We have a ge'en yankiv, a pride. So that pride is a certain form of chutzpah, it's an audacity. The question, of course, is how do you make sure that doesn't spill over to a chutzpah that is unhealthy, where a person is arrogant in front of someone that they should be humbled before, a teacher, a rebbe, and so on. So it's taka a challenge, and we discussed it last week. So I just want to bring a few more sources regarding this. There's a sikha Purim 70 years ago. We're celebrating this year 75 years from the Frierdiker Rebbe came to America. Which that itself was also a chutzpah when the Frierdiker Rebbe said, the first sikha, that America is not different, and everybody wondered, how can the Frierdiker Rebbe stand up, defy this big country of America? America, money is the God of the United States. The Frierdiker Rebbe stood up there, famous story, it's printed already in different sikhs, and I heard about it from some of the eyewitnesses who were there. The Frierdiker Rebbe gets off a boat, we traveled 12 days, you can imagine it was draining, the Frierdiker Rebbe was not in good health, comes off the boat in a wheelchair, which today we have pictures of and videos of, and they come to the Greystone Hotel, and the Frierdiker Rebbe says he wants to say a few words. Everyone expected the Frierdiker Rebbe would want to rest after this ordeal, coming from Europe, Nazi Europe. So it was an ordeal. And yet the Frierdiker Rebbe wants to say a few words. So I don't know how many people were there, 10 people, 20 people, 30 people, not many. Frierdiker Rebbe begins to speak with the firmness and audacity, yes, of a Rebbe, where he says he came to America not to save himself. He didn't want to come here. The Eibishter sent him here. And the reason he's here is to show that America is not different. That one day we will show that this coldness of America, and it's Amalek of America, you could say, because of the apathy, the karcha baderech, the coldness of America, we will thaw the ice of America. And we will have both the shivas and institutions, and we'll have children running around with tzitzis and yarmulkes, and we're going to make this place just as it was the old home. That was the gist of it. Afterwards, the Frierdiker Rebbe writes in his diary, a few chassidim came in to see the Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe, and chassidim, these were chassidim, and they said to the Rebbe, we want to just, in your honor and the honor of your father, your holy father, and honor of your holy grandfather, and all the way back to the Alter Rebbe, we just want to make sure you don't get disappointed. What you said is very nice, but it's not going to happen here. They basically tell him the Frierdiker Rebbe he's not realistic, quote unquote. And this was the friends of the Frierdiker Rebbe. This was not the enemies. Frierdiker Rebbe writes in his diary, I believe it's also in Tofshin Hay, somewhere in that area around Purim time. Frierdiker Rebbe writes, "Kennt sich vorstellen, the Tränen was an Reis von meiner Eigen, der erste Nacht, was ich gewinnt auf an Amerikaner Boden." You can imagine the tears that flowed from my eyes the first night I was in American soil, hearing this from my friends, my chassidim. Obviously, thank God the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't listen to them. That's the audacity of a Rebbe, Shtuz de Kedusha, doesn't go with the logic that many people have, calculations and business logic, and forged ahead and look at the world today, 75 years later. Here we are, from Tes Adar, Tofshin, when the Frierdiker Rebbe first came. 5 years later, Tofshin Hay, there's a Sikha Purim where the Rebbe talks about, the Frierdiker Rebbe talks about the importance of the Naflinu, to feel proud as a chassid, to feel unique. And he says we want chassidim to feel special in the sense of the edelkeit that they, achrayas that they have, the responsibility to be more refined in midas tevis. He talks about especially in Avos Yisrael. Medaf reinbringen in the idische Herzlach, in the Jewish hearts, children even, as a dav sein der neflinu in alt zum beikr in Avos Yisrael, that you should feel the responsibility when a person has pride. And we're not talking about vanity here, and we're not talking about arrogance. We're talking about pride. A ge'en yankiv, ele cheskim kememiyas, where you stand, became a skufa. You walk upright, Mordechai, that pride, that's a pride that's saturated with bittul. We'll talk about that in a moment. So he says he wants, das is in eire Hand. Seid sich mescheir dem Keres Ruach von dem, was ihr wird einpflanzen. He's talking to the Mechanchim, the end of the Sikha Purim Tavshin Hey, 70 years ago. That imagine the great joy, the great nachas that you will achieve by implanting in the children this sense of pride. But das wird sich honzen l'deire deiris. This will have an impact for generations and generations. Und Mashiach wird doch kuschen die Sterns von die Kinderlach. And Mashiach will kiss the foreheads of these little children that you brought up with such a Chassidische pride. Und tut das nicht, das bebchines Eise Malache Hashem Beremiah. He talks about it. He said, but medaf doch nicht meilig sein in them, nor medaf reden in dem Tzad HaTev. And the Sikha, you can look it up, it's in Sefer HaSichos Tavshin Hey, page 71 and on, through 74, the Purim Sikha 70 years ago. That idea of having that type of pride, how do you make sure that it doesn't spill over into arrogance? It, of course, has that potential. Well, like everything in life. We're not going to have pride because it potentially can turn into an arrogance? Obviously not. Because of the fools, God's going to destroy the world? That's not the approach. However, you do that and you learn from the Alter Rebbe, who learned from Yaakov Avinu. The Alter Rebbe came out of prison, so he had plenty of opportunity to gloat. Chaz v'shalom, he didn't do that. To say, look, hey, we were victorious over our enemies, who massed and who informed. And yet the Alter Rebbe writes in the famous Igeres Katenti, Lacher Peterburg, when he came out of Petersburg, which is from the prison there, printed in Igeres HaKedesh and Tanya, Simon Beis, the second letter, Katenti mikol achsadim. I'm humbled. I'm small. I'm diminished. I'm humbled to all the chsadim that God did to me. This is the words of Yaakov Avinu when he came after 20 years of Lavan and survived. Not only survived, built a family. I'm humbled. This is what great people do. When there's something that gives them pride, they experience it with humility. Chassidische pride is not meant to be arrogant. It meant to be that why were you given Gedula? You think it's for you? It's in order to serve. Like the Eibishter told Moshe Rabbeinu, Gedula, I gave it for you. I gave it for you to be a serve, to feel the responsibility that you have. That when you're exposed to Chassidus, you're exposed to the Rabbeim, you have a responsibility to be more refined. And like the Sifri says, V'haftas Hashem Elokecha, make God beloved to all those that see you. The v'naflinu that Jews in general have, and Chassidim specifically, is about making yourself feel more responsible in behaving in a way that this is a dugma chaya, this is a living example of what the Rebbe would want someone to be like. Someone say, wow, that's the student of the Rebbe. That's a Rebbe I would respect when I see what his students are like. So as he talks there about being edelkeit, refinement, and how we behave differently. So this is how you bavon when you know that the pride is saturated with a sense of humility, because it's not about you're a better person. It's you had the schus. You were blessed to be the right place, the right time, to be exposed to influences that lifted you up to a level that you would not have been there on your own. Yadinish benafshi, everyone could look in their own hearts. Where would you be had you not been exposed to Chassidus or to its teachings and its standards? So we're given a great gift by the Rabbeim, Chassidus, teaching us the highest standards that a human being can become. Getlach, you can become godly. And it's meant to be, yes, to feel that deep pride and deep sense of purpose, but in a way that's not a contradiction to arrogance. Is it a possibility that it can spill over? Yes, of course, and that's what you have to control and make sure and keep at bay and tame, make sure it doesn't spell out that way, as we spoke of in the Sikha from Tofrei Tzadik Tes that I cited last week. I'll also bring, this is again due to a friend of my, a good colleague, Rabbi Yankee Winner from Melbourne, who made me aware of some of these sources. The Rebbe actually quoted the Sikha Tavshin Hey, the Rebbe in Purim Tavshin Yutes. I should add that as a Maramokim. Okay, talks about the Talmidei Atmimim and so on. And then from Teda Shalom, page 175, that in order to affect another person, you have to have the hergish of an atzmi. You have to sense your uniqueness, because it's the only way you can have the confidence and the self-esteem that's necessary to really be mashpia and influence others. Not to be nispal, not to be intimidated. But even someone that's greater than you. So here, right there, you have it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, to achieve something, you have to sense that confidence. You have to sense that drive, that sense of total commitment. Obviously, the Rebbe Rashab is not suggesting that you should have chutzpah and in any way, God forbid, do something that's not appropriate to someone bigger than you. But also not to allow someone who even may be bigger than you to throw cold water on your drive. So this is the Chassidic chutzpah that is in Kedusha and Shtuz the Kedusha. And what we have to make sure and take care is not to make sure that it doesn't spill over into any form of arrogance. There's a story from the Tzemach Tzedek, famous story where a person owed someone else money, a chassid. So the chassid suddenly invoked the yahrzeit of Chassidus. It says in Shayach V'Amunah, the whole world doesn't exist. Ein Eid Milvadeh. The whole yesh doesn't exist. Basically saying, what do you want from me? Everything else is garnished. You want money from me? It's all garnished. Money is garnished. So they went to the Tzemach Tzedek and said, what do we do? Instead of saying that he doesn't owe the money, he's saying the money is garnished. So Tzemach Tzedek said, Zomen im weglegen auf a garnished und geben ihm 20 garnished. In other words, to give him a mashkanta, it's also garnished. Since everything is garnished, let him have a garnished on a garnished. Take the garnished and put him on a garnished and give him 20 garnished. So obviously this goes into the concept in Chassidus where we have to find the reconciliation between bittul elemus and mitzias elemus. On one hand, God created the world. Bereshis bara Elokim Yisrael Shemayim v'aretz is a reality. God created a world. On the other hand, we learn that the world is meaningless, nothingness. Because without 1 second, the divine power, the divine word, for one moment, God would choose or stop speaking, the whole world stops existing. But yet God did choose. So we have to understand that God wants a Metzias, but the Metzias is not because you're a Metzias, it's because the Eibishter wants it to be a Metzias. So it's bittul, at the same time it's Metzias because of the bittul. And that goes back to the same idea. The reason we have pride and we have a certain element of Chassidish chutzpah to go out and do something, not because we have chutzpah, it's because the Eibishter says, I want you to go into the helam of the hest of the world, a dark world, a challenging world, and I want you to transform it. For that you need to have a takeif. When you feel that that's your command, that's your calling, that's you're charged to do that, you go with a certain type of firm determination, netzach, midas netzachen. But you're going because that is the mission, not because you happen to be a determined person or an ambitious person. So that's where you have to be careful that it's not coming from your nature, ambitious nature, it's coming from the divine commandment, and then you use your ambition toward that. And you could see many differences between a person who's doing it because they're ambitious or they're doing it because it's God's commandment for you to be ambitious. Very, very different. And that's why even people who by nature are maybe meeker or weaker because the Eibishter said so, that itself gives them the power to forge ahead. He also pointed out to me there's a word when the Rebbe Rashab, when the Chayzim were chazering the Maimer of Mikne Rav, which is in Samach Vav, famous Maimer of Matis Maseh Mikne Rav in Samach Vav, where it talks a lot about the bitl of the Eved Poshet and Eved Neman. So there's a language there that a person has to have such a bitl of this Poshet. He gives the example of a master and a servant, that the servant is kasher le'elu kachameh l'maseh. He's literally like a behemoth, like a sheh, like an ox that is, all he's doing is dedicated to carrying the weight of his master. And the same like a donkey. An ox to the yoke and a donkey to the load. That all he is, he's nothing more than the master's possession. Total bittul, an instrument, a vehicle for the divine will. When the Chayzim were chazering this, and as it's known that Rebbe Rashab often was by Chazara, when they were chazering it, they were chazering the words that they heard from the Rebbe, they were like somewhat perplexed that to that extent. They didn't say that, but the way they were chazening, it sounded like they were like, to that extent, that person has to be completely subjugated. That one mortal human being should be nullified to another human being. The Rebbe Rashab, sensing the question, said these words: yeah. In the mashal, dafür doch seine meshugene. The kavana is in dem nimshal. The kavana is in dem nimshal. That's what the Rebbe Rashab said. So the mashal of a human to another human, dafür takazai meshuge. Which human being is going to subjugate himself to another human being that way? We said before, Mordechai lo yichra v'lo yishtachra. But in the nimshal, the kavana is in the nimshal. So it's interesting. In other words, that it's about a bittul, a true bittul. At the same time, obviously, to human beings, you don't have such a bittul. Now, he didn't say it, but it could also be the bittul to Rebbe may be on this level as well. But that's because the Rebbe is not human. Because the Rebbe is representing the divine will and the divine mission. So when the Rebbe gave some person a shlichus, you didn't just see a Rebbe decided to give you a shlichus. It was shchina v'daberes meter greinei, and it was a divine command coming through the Rebbe, like a Moshe Rabbeinu. This is what you have to do, and you don't ask questions. So the bittul is in the nimshal there too. Okay. With that said, I think enough about the chutzpah issue. Let's move on to another follow-up, and that is, there were a number of questions regarding the issue of the sad issue, which I really wanted to avoid speaking more about, but since I wanted to say a final line, at least at this period, we'll probably address it more in other episodes in the future, because sadly it's still a topic, and that is the issue of violation of another person, molestation. So I'm not going to read everybody's responses. There were a number of responses, both extremes. Some said I went too far, and some said I didn't go far enough. Okay. It reminds me what the Rebbe once told my father. My father once said that there are people complaining that the Allgemeiner is not frum enough. So the Rebbe smiled and said, so I guess that's a good sign, because you can't satisfy everybody. I'm not here to satisfy. I'm trying to just convey, as I best of my knowledge and understanding, what Chassidus says, what the Sikhs say, the Rebbe, and so on. And everybody's, of course, entitled to agree or disagree, or your other sources, please send them to me. And let's just make sure our disagreement should be based on sources, not just based on your feelings or based on your own subjective experiences. So the two extremes were, number one was, how could you even say that a violator, a pedophile, a molester could do tshuva, could be redeemed? Can you tell this to a person who was abused? Well, as I made it very clear, that that we Jews believe ein lecha davar emed b'fnei tshuva. There's nothing that stands in the way of tshuva, and yes, it is true that it may be difficult. And I'm not suggesting in any way minimizing. I actually equated a molester with a reidif, which is called a murderer, actually, because it's a form of soul murder, and maybe more than once because it's repeated. At the same time, there are conditions, and not because a person says I'm healing, with the right accountability and vigilant supervision by objective parties, every person should be allowed the opportunity to correct their ways. Now, if a person does not agree to that, that means they're not correcting their ways. I'm not suggesting that they do it, but I'm suggesting the possibility. And obviously, I cannot speak on behalf of someone who's been a victim or been hurt by someone. I cannot be moichel, a molester, on his behalf. He's going to have to deal with the person. The perpetrator is going to have to deal with the person he violated. So I'm not here to say that. I'm just suggesting as an overall formula, we have a Torah, and there's certain guidelines, you could put certain conditions, and people don't subject themselves to that. So may the pieces fall as they may. So just to go ahead, even as emotional as we are and as disturbed as we are, and I'm quite disturbed as much as anyone is, when you hear children, defenseless children being hurt, and I think I made it very clear in the last episode, I don't want to go over it again right now. At the same time, we have to take an approach from Torah, not based purely on our feelings. Of course, without allowing, God forbid, any given, even 1% chance that a person should do it again. That's ridiculous to even consider that. But in their own way, where they are absolutely not in any state of being dangerous to someone else. If they're a state of danger, even if a suffix, we all know what you do when someone is dangerous. You put them away. But if there can be a rehabilitation, there are ways to do it, and you could definitely encourage people to go in that direction, families and so on. Then there was the critique the other way around. How could you equate it with murder? Murder, like literally sticking a knife in someone's heart. Well, my dear friends, those that have that question, thank God that you're maybe never been affected by molestation and its devastating impact. Murder is many ways, even Lashon Hara is called katle tlisa. When you say Lashon Hara on someone, the Gemara says you kill 3 people. The person you're speaking Lashon Hara on, the person who's speaking, and the person who you're speaking, the person you're speaking about, the person who's speaking, the person you're speaking to, and the person you're speaking about. So the Gemara, Malbim Pnei Chaveri, the Gemara calls death, because when you insult someone, why does their face become white? Because you're draining blood from them. It's a form of death. So let's not be afraid of this word murder. And in many ways, you have to ask mumchim. Who defines what is murder, psychological and soul murder, is not people who have no experience, who have no idea. You have to go to people who are experienced. And it's about really looking at something head on, as painful as it may be. So that's my few notes on this, sad and terrible phenomenon that exists. Our goal is to eradicate it, mikol v'kol, in every possible way, 0 tolerance, even less than 0 tolerance if there was anything less than 0, in every possible way. This is our children, al tiga b'meshiche. This is the most precious thing God gave us. The most defenseless, vulnerable creatures on earth are our children. And if we don't protect that, I don't know what we are doing with our lives. Very bluntly put, and that's that. So obviously the goal here is preventive medicine, to not even entertain possibilities, and we should never have to talk about it again. And I hope I never have to talk about it again as well. Okay. Now that we got that out of the way, let's move on with the sadness and joy. Oh, before sadness and joy, since this is a topic that I wanted to address a number of times, and I don't want to push it off again, conflict management. But it's also connected in a sense to Purim as well, conflict management. I've been teaching Ayin Beis now some number of years, 4 years actually to be precise, and it doesn't stop fascinating me and everyone that learns it, the fascinating ideas that continue to emerge. Lately, in the chapters Reish Tzadik Vav Elach, which is 296 and on, is close to the end of volume 1, it's a tremendous discussion that can be applied to Chassidus. Now that the contest of MyLife contest Chassidus Applied is over, I could say that this would have been a great topic. I'm not saying it's the only one, but it's a great topic to apply Chassidus in the most profound way to conflict management, whether it's conflict management at work, at home, shalom bayis issues between parents and children, or between you and yourself. The Rebbe Rashab lays out there a fascinating model, what he calls it the Toyu and Tikkun contrast, of 4 different types of dysfunction that's possible when 2 things have to encounter each other. Which the essence of conflict management is about forces that are in some way at odds with each other. What he calls it is Eir and Keli. Eir and Keli is a very general term for 2 forces. It could be Mashpia Makabel, a teacher and a student, a parent and a child, a husband and a wife, a worker and a co-worker, you and your boss. However that conflict takes on, so he says there's 4 types of dysfunctionality and imbalance possible in a conflict. And I'll briefly go over them, and much can be elaborated upon. So in the perfect world, you have as 2 forces come together. Let's use the teacher-student because it's the easiest one to explain, is that a teacher, even though he's greater than the student, yet at the same time, he has the wherewithal and the attitude that he's going to apply himself to sit down with a student or with a group of students and teach them. That's from the point of view of the teacher. The student, from the student's point of view, the student has to be in a state of not arrogance, but zreik moral talmidim, a certain sense of bittul, receptivity. If you don't have a student that's receptive to a teacher and is busy with his own things, if you don't have a teacher that's receptive to the student, meaning applying himself, you don't have a meeting point. So in the best scenario would be they both, Eir and Keli, both the Eir applies itself to the Keli, as he puts it, machlif tivei, it actually assumes the personality of the Keli. So even though the Eir on its own would want to be on its own, its nature is to go upward, it goes downward, and the student, the Keli, it prepares itself and primes itself to be receptive instead of being in its own state of yeshus and its own identity, be receptive to hear something from the teacher. That works well, the proper mezig and nechen, as he puts it, the proper mix and blend, you have yourself the fusion of 2 forces. Now, frankly, when you really think about it, this is not just teacher and student and all the other examples, it's even in science and chemistry. Every interaction, every time technology works is when you have the flow, the balance between two forces. If, for example, electricity would rush too quickly into appliances, it would make it blow. That's why you have circuit breakers. If it flows too slowly, it doesn't energize. So you constantly need a balance between two forces that are trying to meet with each other. When you have chemical stability or chemical instabilities, I don't just mean it mentally, I mean it also in chemistry as a science. It's constantly finding the proper mix. Anyone who cooks food knows that. Without the proper mix, you can mix them together and they don't work. It doesn't work. So he explains that, so that would be the perfect scenario when it does work. How about not working? So he says there are 4 ways that it could not work. Number 1 is that, in this case, the oir is too much in its own ayin state. It's too abstract, too beyond, it's not applying itself to the container. It's going in the other direction. And the keli is also going in his direction. So the oir is ayin b'yeser and the keli is yesh b'yeser. Think of a teacher who's consumed with himself and his studies and maybe going to his teacher, and the student is consumed with himself, so they don't have a meeting point. This, of course, does not allow for any type of confluence, any type of joining and fusion. Dysfunctional imbalance number 2 is that the keli is the opposite extreme. The keli is too negligible, too fragile. It's too much bottle. Imagine a student standing in front of a teacher, is such awe, he can't even hear or listen and absorb anything. I should add that in the mashal that he does give, there's a mashal of a psila, think of a wick and a flame. In the first scenario, in a good scenario, you have the wick is the proper wick, a piece of cotton, a thread, the proper type of wick that allows itself to be ignited by a flame, and you need the flame to apply itself. If the flame is too powerful or the wick is too crass, take a piece of metal. A piece of metal is, bameh madlikin, is not a proper wick. A piece of wood is a proper wick. You have many wicks that are proper. That's why there's a whole perek in Masechta Shabbos, bameh madlikin, what you can use for wicks. So in the scenario number 1, the imbalance is that the fire is too abstract or too powerful, and the keli, the wick, is too crass, so there's no meeting. In problem number 2, it's the opposite extreme with the wick. The wick is too negligible. Think of a very thin thread, or a thread of a thread of hair. It burns out so quickly that it also does not serve its purpose. It means it's too little keli. You need the keli to be a keli. You need a student to have a presence of mind and composure to be able to receive from the teacher. That's problem number 2, where the keli is almost is too bottle, to the point that it's too nullified. Problem number 3, which he calls the worst of them all, is where the keli is a very big yesh, and the oir is a very big yesh, and the keli is a very big yesh, and it causes the oir to become even more of a yesh, and both of them get dragged down where they don't have, there's no humility at all. In the technical example he gives for it is a wet, saturated piece of wood, or a very saturated wick. So you can ignite it, but it burns and burns and burns, and the fire and the wood does not get consumed. So a psychological example for this would be the drowning victim syndrome. Someone is drowning, the lifeguard, the oir, is coming to save the drowning victim, but the drowning victim is so panicky and so desperate that he pulls down the lifeguard with him. In psychology, you find this concept often, where you have somebody, a client, is very needy, and the therapist or the counselor or the mashpia feels they can save that person. They get over-immersed. So here you have the opposite extreme. The second one was the keli became too much keli. Here the oir is getting too immersed into the keli, so it loses its real identity of being an authority, and can end up falling into the darkest places possible. So the oir now is trapped within a keli that has dragged it down further. So the oir is too much yesh, the keli is too much yesh, and together they become even more of a yesh. He gives the example, the Nephilim are this an example. He talks about people who have great energies, but when they get trapped in the wrong place, suddenly the great energy becomes very destructive. So he calls this the worst imbalance of all 4. And the fourth imbalance that he describes is that they do join. These three are all they haven't really joined. They've joined, but even before they joined, there was already a problem. Here, the Eir and Keli are both humble enough to join. The teacher is applying himself. The student is receptive. The wick is there, the flame is there, but the meziga is not proper. Their ability, their way of joining together is imbalanced. And he says this can also happen in two ways. So the fourth way breaks into two, which is either the Eir is too much bottled to the Keli, or the Keli is too much bottled to the Eir. Those are the two ways that can happen in this improper mix. Now, much can be said about this, but I find it fascinating because you can take this and understand how to deal with different situations where there's conflict. In every given scenario, these four play themselves out. And as he explains, in order to be mesaken, to repair these imbalances, the first thing is you need two steps. The first thing you need is that the Eir and Keli should recognize each other. Because if they don't recognize each other, they're definitely not going to communicate with each other. So the first three imbalances is basically, you have a problem where two parties have grown apart. A husband and wife, let's say, God forbid. And you can't even get them to the table. So the first thing is you have to weaken their resolve and say, let's just sit together. Because then you have an opening. Then comes the next step, where not only you sit together, where they can be civil one another, but then comes the next step where you can get them to communicate and start working on seeing that each of you has something that the other one needs. You really need each other. And there should be a give and take. So that alone is like a two-step process in mediation, where the first thing is you're trying to just create a scenario where you can just even, you may hate the person. You may not want to hear anything they have to say, but at least show up. At least be there. When you can get two people to at least come to that point, the Eir and Keli, or however you want to interpret who the Eir and the Keli is, it's not relevant which is which, but the bottom line is that you get them to be in a situation where they can be in the same presence. And then comes the process of the proper mix and blend in order for them to join together. But it's interesting, as he says, that all of the dysfunctionalities, all the imbalances I just mentioned are based on one thing, yeshes. Hergish atzmei. It's all about you. Even a teacher who says, I have enough time for a student, and it may be for good reason because he's involved in deeper teachings, but it's about himself. Doesn't want to go out of his own comfort zone. So the key in any type of mediation is getting people out of their comfort zone. Because the comfort zone, you're in your comfort zone, you're in your comfort zone, obviously there won't be a meeting place. So that is the ultimate challenge in any type of mediation. So you can look it up, learn Perek Reish Tzadik Vav Ve'elach, to page chapter 296 and on, in the end of the first section of Ayin Beis. I plan to talk about more of this, more detail, but I wanted to just begin laying it out because you really can take this and turning it into models of functionality and dysfunctionality and looking at every scenario and seeing where is the problem. Is the problem number one? Two different worlds. Problem number two, that one is too dominant and one is too passive. The problem number three, where the contrary, the one that's supposed to be influencing is now trapped by the one that needs to be saved. It's called enabling, or it could be called codependency, and so on. And number four, that once you do have a joining, it should be done with the right balance and the right mix. Okay. So since we have a few more minutes, let me go back to the topic at hand, which is Adar, V'shenichnas Adar Marbin B'simcha. So a few questions that were asked. And I refer also to episode number 5, which was exactly a year ago, where we talked also about the topic of simcha and joy. Question number 1: we have a mitzvah to serve God with joy. Yes. How to do that when things are not too happy in our lives? How can a person always be b'simcha, filled with real joy? It seems like an impossible standard. Okay. Another question: is it realistic to always be b'simcha, filled with real joy? Seems like Okay. Furthermore, when we are in a state of despondency, how can we differentiate between sadness and depression? How to make practical what Tanya says in chapter 26 and on. Is there a difference between sadness and depression? Okay. Just repeating myself. I just see the questions are overlapped. Fine. Well, chapter 26 and on in Tanya is a fascinating discussion on all this. It's hard to sum up 9 chapters in a few minutes, But I will say a few things that's straight from Tanya. And going back to what I said before about the month of Adar, there's simcha as a state of being and there's simcha as an act. Many of us really confuse the two, and when we look for happiness, we're saying, what can I do to become happy? You look at happy people, they never ask such questions. Happy people are just happy. That's how they are. That's their state. And even when they have Yisurim, famous story, they don't even recognize it. Sometimes they do. But a happy person is a state of being. And that's really the goal you want to get to. However, someone may not be there yet. So therefore, they need to have things that bring you to simcha. Dvarim hameviyim l'dei simcha, as Shulchan Aruch says. You buy your children clothing for Yom Tov, wife, you give them gifts, aguzim, etc., etc. So there are things that awaken simcha. But that's not meant to replace the fundamental joy that is the birthright of each one of us. So when you look in Tanya, you'll see a few points, key points that the Alter Rebbe makes. He begins in Perek Chavav, number 1, saying the importance, first of all, of having a positive attitude. Because when you're fighting a battle and you're depressed and you're down, your sheer willpower and your weakened state doesn't allow you to fight properly. So you can have someone more powerful, physically more powerful than another person, but if he, the stronger one, feels weak psychologically and feels depressed or feels sad, the weaker one can actually win. So attitude is critical in any type of battle. And that's why in Avodas Hashem it's so important, because life is a battle. And if you're going to go in with an attitude of atzvus and a certain depressed attitude, that will weaken your whole state of mind. So having a positive state of mind, a positive attitude is critical in the whole process. Not only in Avodas Hashem, mind you, in anything in life. In business, for example. There are people who, suddenly you face a challenge in your business. Which business won't face a challenge? Some people get overwhelmed by it, and they give up, they become hopeless. Another person can come and salvage that same situation. You have businesses that were taken over by someone else because the one who first owned it gave up, and the other person saw in it an opportunity. So there you see attitude can change the whole entire approach to something. Hopelessness weakens you even further than the challenge itself. So besides every challenge in life is the attitude we have, and a positive attitude gives you far more an edge over any adversarial force. That's one thing he says. Then he continues and speaks, and what about how do you look at the negative itself? That's an attitude, fine. Okay, so now I take a positive attitude to everything, but now I'm facing a negative. So he gives eitzah, he says, eitzah yutza, one of the eitzahs to all types of sadness is to recognize that in every difficult situation there's an opportunity. He talks about ava musuteres, the ava chesed mechusim, where it can be concealed. That's why we say gamzula teva, the idea that everything has deeper good inside of it. So in addition to the attitude now that you have a positive attitude, and you did not allow yourself to get disturbed by or in any way weakened by the challenge, now you can look at the challenge and say, where can I see in it some positive element? In Perek Shin Aleph, actually, in Ayin Beis, just learning it literally these days, it's a tremendous chapter where he talks about this, how the Nefesh Alikis can get inspired and wants to get out of this physical world. It hates this world. It despises, so wants just let me out of here. And says that it doesn't make any cheshbon of figuring out what is the problem here. How do you get out? And what can you do? What are the redeeming factors of this world and this life? So basically what can happen is the emotional reaction to a challenge can cause a person to become so demoralized or so consumed with their own view, they will not even be able to look at and find the opportunities that are hidden there. So then comes number 2 is finding the opportunities once you have that composure and state of mind. Then the Alter Rebbe continues and develops this further with more elements that help a person get to a state of simcha, which also includes that when you see a challenge that you can't overcome, think and understand that maybe God sent it to you precisely to challenge you and to bring out your stronger faculties. So that's another element that should give you joy. And then he talks about a situation where the goof is so crass, you can't deal with it, so you have to break it. And that should bring joy because you have the power to overcome your enemy. And finally, in the end of the 9 chapters in Perek Lamed Gimel and then Lamed Daled, Lamed Gimel primarily talks about the simcha that you have from fulfilling God's mission in this world. that He sent you down to Adar b'Tachtain. One of the Yud-based Psukim comes from those Psukim. That you come down to this world and precisely make Adar b'Tachtain in the Simcha, that you know you're fulfilling God's will in this difficult world. And there's more, of course, in this structure, but because of limits in time, we'll leave it for the next episode. Since it's the month of Chodesh Adar, and we're literally coming closer to Purim, so I want to wish everybody, using the aces of Chassidus, to focus on your neshama instead of your guf. When you focus on your soul and you lift yourself up to a soul level, generally speaking, that itself brings one more joy. When a person allows themselves to be affected and influenced by materialism, that will always bring a person to less simcha. Because materialism by definition is weak, is temporary, and how could it give you real joy when it itself is constantly needs recognition? Something that's insecure cannot give you security. The things that give us security are spiritual foundations that are unwavering. And finally, the attitude of difference between sadness and depression. Sadness and depression, as I said earlier, sadness is not a contradiction to simcha. Because when you have simcha sachayim, when you know you're here, part of your challenge is the journey that you go through. And that journey sometimes has a sad element to it. That is not a sadness that weakens you. That's a sadness that motivates you. Atzvus, on the other hand, as the Alter Rebbe makes clear, is demoralizing. One makes you go to sleep, and the other one makes you wake up. One is a sadness that turns into depression, makes you go to sleep, and you become unmotivated. And another is a sadness that says, what am I going to do to get out of this place? What am I going to do to bring joy? What am I going to do to build up the strength necessary to forge ahead? Very, very different approach. Both are experiencing a sad thing, but one paralyzes you, and you go to sleep, and the other one, you get even more motivated and excited to achieve and overcome that challenge. So, the Eibusher should bless that we should only have simcha b'goli. Everyone should have a very freilich Purim, a freilich Chodesh Adar. Remember, Adar continues the simcha even after Purim. The whole month, it says, nepach. Who? So the whole month is transformed. So after Purim comes Shushan Purim and the rest of it, then Mismar Geula. Geula leads us straight into the month of Nisan, which is yet another simcha of Geula, which we shall definitely talk about. So this has been MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 58. And until next week and every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m., everyone have a very freilichen Purim, simchadik Purim, and only simchas begoli together, ourselves, our family, and Klal Yisrael, till the simchas elam al reishim of the Geula hamitis v'ashlema.